Thank you for watching this Last Mile Profits video.
So we are live. Gary, this is really exciting.
I think you are very excited.
I
yes.
am very excited because this is the first ever Last Mile Profits live here at Leaders in Logistics. And the great news is it's interactive, so you will get a chance at the end to ask questions and get answers directly. So we're not going to be able to hide behind a veil of the internet. We're going to have to give you answers now. But Gary, most important, what are we going to talk about today?
I think we're going to touch on everyone's favourite subject at the moment, which is the FedEx InPost investment collaboration announcement and its potential impact in the out-of-home market.
Yeah, so first of all, there are a lot of people that say that the deal is done. The deal isn't done. We personally think it will happen, but the ramifications of that deal are actually much, much larger than many people expect.
Well, I mean, they're massive, aren't they? So you've got the biggest brand arguably in out-of-home, which is InPost, and you've got the first carrier to ever do tracking worldwide with one of the largest air operations and a fantastic service proposition across the globe. So the two things coming together is genuinely going to be exciting.
And I was thinking actually we should split it up into compartmentalized boxes, as it were. So let's start with Europe. What does it mean in Europe? So I'll maybe kick off and then you can add your views. So on one hand, you've got the fact that InPost, let's be very honest, wrote the book on how to run a locker operation, but they don't have coverage. FedEx, because of the past presence and because of the TNT merger, do have coverage in some of the places where they don't exist. If you put that together, it's quite a powerful combination.
Yeah, but the other thing as well is when you draw the InPost map of Europe, as we said before, there's a great big hole in the middle of it, which is the second largest e-commerce market in Europe, fourth largest in the world. So is this start of a play for InPost Germany?
Exactly, and the reality is FedEx would do the middle mile, something that InPost doesn't have. I'm not sure, and this is still a discussion, what's going to happen. Do they need something else? My bet would be that if they could add Hermes to the party, that will be really interesting.
Yeah, well, I've got no idea any more than you do probably whether Hermes is up for sale or not, but Hermes UK was bought and became Every and has changed hands a couple of times again since, so that's a possibility. But it's also thinking about it. Some markets, you're already seeing some FedEx InPost collaboration. Italy, FedEx were using the InPost locker infrastructure there. FedEx have made an acquisition in Italy with Pronto Pacco. So they've already bought over 3,000 Pudo shops. So you're starting to see this great big American engine, which has not been famous for B2C, stepping into that B2C world in a far more certain way than perhaps it has for a while.
And to be honest, whereas I think the Americans have written the book in terms of fulfillment. In terms of last mile, Europe is way ahead. And I think this is a really smart move. So if this plays out as it could, we're going to end up having InPost, FedEx together, having absolutely unparalleled coverage in Europe. But I think the deal covers far more than that. So let's talk a little bit about across the pond, about America. What's your feeling about potential developments there?
I think there are a huge number of e-commerce developments that have really found their firm footing in Europe. So in the olden days, because I'm British and biased, we'd say we started in England, be copied in Europe, and eventually 3 to 5 years later would pass back to the US. And that still seems to be the case. Certainly with out of home, there is buds of starting of activity in the States, but really nobody's made a big, decisive, high investment play. And the carrier landscape there is really changing.
And I have to say something, if you actually look at the US market, there's a lot of potential. I think if this deal happens, the guys and girls at Advent and InPost and FedEx have really thought this out well, because not many people probably know, but if you read the Last Mile Experts out of home report for the US, FedEx actually has 45,000 access points, at least they did last year.
Yeah, and they're not alone in that. So UPS have got 22,000 access points, USPS have got 31,000 post offices. So you've already got the thick end of 100,000 retail-style locations where parcel transactions can take place. But, as we both know, these aren't always the locations where certainly the next generation want to go and do their parcel pick-up or drop-off. So things are going to change.
However you look at it, though, one player with 45,000, which is head and shoulders above the others. If you start adding lockers to those 45,000 access points, this becomes really interesting. So my personal view is that this deal, of course, Europe was important, but it was also, and perhaps even more so, about the US. And then there's a third. So, let's watch this space. I think when we meet next year, because hopefully this will be something we follow up again next year, I think we'll be talking about what actually happened in the US if the deal does come to fruition. But there's one other thing. FedEx are brilliant at cross-border orchestration, the data, the customs clearance, and so on. This theoretically opens doors for InPost worldwide.
Well, you've certainly it's one of your pet subjects, and we talked about it in other videos, this idea of locker to locker and cross-border locker to locker, when you're moving your kind of Fabergé eggs between your various homes around the world, and your wife's tiara and everything gets shipped, you go for locker to locker because not only are you very wealthy, you're an absolute skinflint. So being able to do that cheaply and economically is going to be very appealing to you.
So just for the record, my wife does not have a Fabergé egg, and please, no one should mention this to her because this could be very expensive for me.
I'm sure she'd like one.
I'm sure she'd like one. I'm not sure I would.
No.
So look, I think we've covered the most important things. But
well, I think there's one thing we should, before we move on from the US, the other thing is these startup carriers. And I think if I was working at Uni or OnTrack or OneRail or SpeedX, I'd be pretty fed up with being called a startup carrier now. Some of these guys are doing 240 million parcels a year.
Pretty big startup.
In the States, that's a rounding error when you've got 21, 22 billion parcels in total. But if you compare that to some European carriers, that's as big as they ever get in some European markets. And FedEx and UPS are slow to respond to this challenge. If you look at the data, and Brody had some data on the screen yesterday, there is market growth in the US, but none of it is coming from the big three. All of it is coming from either Amazon, or it's coming from these regional carriers, which are now spreading across the country, becoming national. So I think there's something definitely going to happen. Now, whether FedEx is responding to that challenge and doing a kind of technology skip, if you like. Don't bother with trying to compete with home delivery, with the likes of USPS and Amazon Logistics. Go straight to out of home as the value for money way of doing B2C delivery. And if I was a betting man, that's where I'd be putting my money.
I'm with you. I think that this is an opportunity for FedEx to actually leapfrog over everything else and do what is done in Europe. I agree with you that some of these agile regional carriers will have an opportunity, but to be honest, if FedEx does have the technology and the know-how they gained from InPost, my bet would be with them. But that leads me on to the last question. What does this mean for UPS, who, let's be honest, not many people know this, I think, but the first proper out-of-home network in the world was proper, when I say proper, but multi-country, was something called Kiala. I don't know if anyone's heard of Kiala. UPS bought this, I think, about 15 years ago.
Well, the guy that runs out of home for UPS in Europe, Christian, was a member of the staff at Kiala. So they still have that capability and expertise in-house.
So the amazing thing, they bought the first network and then proceeded effectively to kill it. So I think that the key question now is, will UPS wake up?
Yeah.
They're an amazing carrier. They've done a great job in terms of traditional door-to-door, but the world is changing.
Well, I think the final thing we ought to say, really, thank you very much to Bloq.it for hosting our first ever Last Mile Live Profits. And as you can see, their logo is dotted about. They also have an order for 20,000 lockers from InPost, which is fairly well known with the industry. But be curious where we're going to have to go and visit those lockers. Where do you think they're going to end up on the grounds?
Well, I have a feeling, but actually, let's not give it away because I think this is going to be something good for the next event. But I have a feeling that lockers are going to appear in places that you wouldn't expect. And that's going to be our sweet little secret and Bloq.it's sweet little secret.
Well, I don't know how you know more than I do. Mihar is here. He's not told me if he's sending 20,000 lockers to the US. So if that's the case, we don't know yet.
Let's see where it actually comes up. But now, most important, we said this was live. So if any of you have a question, you have a chance to put us in the firing line to ask directly. We cannot hide. So if anyone has a question, this is your chance.
It's also our chance to be super embarrassed if nobody has a question.
No. There will be a question.
Hi. So my question would be, how do you see the share of out-of-home deliveries evolving as a proportion of total deliveries in the coming years?
That is a perfect question. Whoops. So, can I kick
That's
off?
the first time we've ever had a third person into the last mile profits
Yeah, that is the
camera as
first
well,
time
yeah.
we had a third person. It's a little bit next
Making
year. I think we
history.
have to plan the organisation a bit better. But I'll kick off on this one. So maybe some of you already know there are places where out of home is actually 80+%. So, and by the way, you probably know. Do you want to guess where it is?
Yeah, it's well, it's where you're from.
One other one.
Estonia.
Bit north. So
Yeah.
Finland actually is the first place where you had total out-of-home dominance. But my feeling, and I'm going to actually put my neck on the block here, my feeling is that within all developed markets in Europe, and it's sooner rather than later, we're going to have between 40 to 60% out of home. Sometimes it's going to be at the lower end, sometimes it will be at the higher
So
end.
this is where we disagree. I think it absolutely depends on the quality of home delivery in that market. So in some of these markets have really, really adopted out of home in a massive way. Home delivery pretty much sucked before. So the out of home solution was superior and more convenient to the alternative, which was a lackluster or poor home delivery experience. So in markets like that, I'm with you, possibly higher than 60. But if I take my home market, the UK, those guys have invested a lot in home delivery and it pretty much works really well. You know, most of them are claiming about 97, 98, some of them north of 99%, not first time success, but successful delivery to home. It is still a tiny bit less convenient to walk 10 meters to go to a locker than it is to have it handed to you on your doorstep. So this is where we disagree. I think there will be growth in out of home. So I'll give you a stat to back it up. When I was running Collect Plus, we had one client. They offered free delivery to parcel shops, and they offered $3.95 delivery to home. So you would expect the pendulum would swing strongly in favour of a very large shop network. They had 8,000 shops. 27% of parcels went to the shop, 73%. People still paid $3.95. They still weren't persuaded enough by the shop experience to give up home delivery.
Oh, Gary, I do love disagreeing with you. So he's right. In the UK, the first-time delivery is incredible, and probably the guys, in my opinion, who wrote the book on this is DPD UK with their Predict service, where they're getting, you mentioned 97, sometimes they're getting 98+%. And one of the main reasons is Leave with Neighbour and Leave Safe works in the UK. It doesn't work in Europe, and that's what makes it so relatively easy. But I think that once you do the economics, you work out the comparative costs, even with an efficient network like that, out of home will start to play a role. Maybe it's not going to be the 60%, it may be the 30, 40% level.
There's the irony that we still gossip about our neighbours behind their backs, but we trust them to collect our parcel for us, which is quite weird,
but
really.
best-in-class systems are actually so good that you can actually choose which neighbour. So if I was living next door to him, certainly wouldn't want to use his address.
No, I'm friendlier with the house opposite than I am with the house next door, and that's my preference.
So, guys, it'll be really interesting to see. I have put my neck on the block here. I disagree with Gary. I think it's going to be more. I think it will be at least 30, 40%, and I think that will happen within the next...
Well, hang on, you backed off. You said 60 just now.
No, I said 40 to 60.
Well,
Let's watch where it goes.
This is being recorded, so we will
Absolutely.
run this back and
We will
find out.
see.
So, okay.
Any other questions?
Oh, here's another question. Okay.
Yeah, outside of the production, hardware production, what do you think will be the main challenge for the out-of-home industry?
So when you said pollution, yeah?
Yeah, apart from production, what would be the main challenge in out-of-home
Production,
delivery?
okay.
Well, I'll go first this time. So, as you may be aware, I helped to build the Quadient network in the UK. There are 2,700 lockers now. And I said it yesterday, the main three problems with building an out-of-home locker network is location, location, and location. We captured this phrase in our last recording together, but the Americans captured it in the 60s. It's the race for space. Everybody wants the premium location. Everybody wants the locker at the grocery store, at the gas station, everything else, and they're big. So getting your locker on the ground in the right place to get the footfall, the convenience factor, so it's as little inconvenience more than home delivery as possible, is the absolute challenge. And in markets that are really heating up, and I'll use the UK as an example, Every have started chasing locations in the UK. They're a little late. They'll admit to you themselves they're a little late. they might be going into that buyer or into that host and being the 7th person to try to put a locker in that location. So that is absolutely, definitely the challenge. And while we're here, again on the Bloq.it stand, one of those challenges is helped by this new innovation that everybody seems to have on their stand is the standalone drop box. Getting the footprint down to a meter unlocks more locations. Not needing power unlocks more locations. Having battery, solar, or some combination unlocks more locations. And in my mind, that when you're in the weeds and living this life, that's the challenge.
And I have to back this up because one of my friends who worked for a very large company, you may have heard of a company called Cainiao, who have a lot of resources, a lot of parcels, and I'll never forget, he said to me that in Poland, Lockerland, this was 2 or 3 years ago, he was going to set up 3,500 locations in 1 year. Not a lot, 3,500. I said, hair will grow here if you make it. The guy did an incredible job because I think they came up to about 1,300, which was less than half what he promised, and that is absolutely the case. Location, location, location is the issue, but, and it wouldn't be me if I didn't say this, I think there's one other thing. Software. You can get the best hardware in the world, but the secret sauce is the software. That's the thing that allows you to orchestrate, to give the right customer experience. So I think one of the things we should never forget is, yes, you have to have the locations, you have to have the right hardware, but you really, really need software that's going to make it work.
You know, the most interesting thing out of that for me actually was that you've got another friend, which I didn't really expect that. So
I'm not even going to warrant that with an answer. Maybe last question, because we're going to have to wrap up. Is there a last question? We've got last chance for a question.
Hi Gary and hi Marek. What do you think will be the Western European parcel company strategy to recover the distance they have compared to Eastern Europe, Baltics and Nordics for this year and next year?
Oh, that's a pretty cool one.
that's a cool question.
So the question, if everyone didn't hear it, is, what is going to be the strategy in Western Europe to catch up with what's happening in Eastern and, to be honest, Northern, because the Nordics are also pretty far ahead.
Oh, they're huge. Yeah.
Maybe I'll kick off this time.
Please.
So I think, first of all, learn, benchmark. We had a meeting yesterday, and I said, shamelessly, look at what's worked. And let's be honest, if you look particularly at Poland, we quite often do visits for our clients to look at what's happening, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And I think shamelessly take best practice and benchmark. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
But I would say one other thing, to always understand the local market, because you said yourself in the UK, there are certain specifics.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is label printing. At Quadient, we introduced the Dropbox and the label printer, and now that has become the de facto norm for the British consumer. If you try to launch a new locker network in the UK now and you didn't have a printer in your locker, I think people would question it and would probably avoid using it. And I'm not going to name the company in the UK that has got a locker network with no printer in it, but I think they need to think again. But if you try to do that in the Nordics, it would be unnecessary. They've already adopted battery, Bluetooth, app-driven technology, and it's a completely different market. So,
well, there's another story that I know of. We did a lot of work in Romania, and it turns out that legally you're required to have cameras with lockers. So can you imagine there was somebody that bought machines which are actually very good, but could not have a camera? So it really is important to understand the local environment. I would say probably then, let me know if you agree or disagree, probably going to disagree, but I'd say number one, it's about taking best practice for what has worked in Eastern and Northern Europe, replicating it, but also being aware of the fact that each market is specific.
Yeah, and I think the final thing, Francisco, is thinking about legislation and government policy. It's a bit, some of these markets are a bit like the Wild West now. We all like seeing these photographs of, Bürgermeister and whoever going on their travels and taking pictures of 7 different coloured lockers and splashing them everywhere. I mean, not every market, not every jurisdiction is going to say that that's okay. Some of them are going to step up and go, actually, that's pretty damn unattractive, and start to force more regulation, more rules, more stricter criteria for locker deployment. And I think if Western Europe start to see that being overrun, they're probably going to be, shall we be polite, about the more rules-heavy markets stepping in and saying, no, it can't be done like this, you have to do it this way. So I think that might start to steer how Western Europe looks different from Eastern Europe, taking best practice and saying, and also taking worse practice and legislating against it. So I think that will come. But that was a great question. Thank you.
Gary, this has been real fun. I'm looking forward to doing this again. Thanks for your input, engagement, your great questions. You'll be able to see this online, hopefully, depending upon how quick the Bloq.it team are, but hopefully within a couple of days. Thanks to Bloq.it for making this possible. Gary, thanks for the opportunity to have our interesting banter.
I just hope we're back to our normal distance between us before we do it again. I feel more comfortable with 2,000 kilometres between us than 20 centimetres.
I think at least for the next year, that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, everyone. If anyone has any questions, you can catch Gary or me afterwards. Love to answer them. And if you haven't signed up for Last Mile Profits online to take a look at the videos, then you know where to find us. Go into LinkedIn, Last Mile Profits, we're there.
Thank you.
Thank you.